Welcome to the Painting Coach, and today we're painting the brand new Chapter Master of the Raven Guard, Aethon Shaan. I really love this brand new model. A huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending it out to me early so I can create this content. Let's get painting. So I've built the model, and naturally to start with, I've primed it with some black spray. Now the first thing I'm going to do is paint all of the base elements on this model, which is a little bit backwards, but it's going to be messy, so I think it's important to do it first. I want to go for a nice bright rock, so to that end I'm taking some Carrick stone and painting this over all of, I guess it's a really damaged column, what this used to be. So just take your time, get a good coverage on there. It doesn't matter too much if you spill it on the actual model at this point. To shade the model, I'm taking some Space Wolves Grey contrast paint, and I'm just going to put a little bit on a big brush and work this all around that rock, making sure it goes right into the recesses. I don't want this to pool too heavily, so keep an eye on it while it dries to make sure that it doesn't get too messy and doesn't get too heavy in any one particular spot. When that's completely dry, and it's really important that it's completely dry, go back in with some Carrick stone and dry brush it. Now, I'm using one of my Artist Opus Series D dry brushes. You can use whatever dry brushes you prefer. What I'm looking to do is brush downwards, so I'm catching the top of the rock. I'm going to do a little bit of stippling as well on some of the bigger areas, just to catch all of that detail. Next up, using exactly the same brush, I haven't cleaned it. I'm going to take some grey cere and do exactly the same, but I'm really just going to focus this on those sharpest edges. I'm not going to put this all over the rock. Lastly, for the dry brushing, I'm going to take a little bit of white, and this is just going to be a very small dry brush, just catching those raised edges, and it really helps set the rock off. Once I'd finished the dry brushing, I wanted to add a little bit more colour back in because it had just gone a little bit too monotone. So I took some Aethonian Camel Shade and painted this along the bottom parts of the rock. You can see straight away it flows down to the bottom into the recesses and gives you a really nice bit of discoloration. I just worked this on some of the upper areas as well, particularly working it into some of the cracks and crevices, just to give me a little bit more colour interest. I went back in and tidied up some of the black power armour just to give me an idea of how the model was looking. And with that, it was time to paint all of the white elements. Now, there are a fair few on this model, so we've got both arms and obviously those lightning claws. We also have the chest, I was going to call it chest eagle, chest raven, and we've also got Aethon Shaan's mask as well, depending on which head you've used. If you used the helmet, then this technique is fine for that as well. I'm also going to paint the wings on both of those drones and the inside of the booster engine of the jetpack. To shade all of the white, I use some Soul Blight Grey Wash. Now, it's really important that you don't have a huge amount of this on your brush because it can pool quite heavily and it can look a little bit ugly when it dries. So just keep working it as it dries to make sure you haven't got it too heavily in one place. If it does dry too heavily, then you can just take a little bit of grey cere and layer over it because that's a really nice bright grey. And similarly, you can also go back to Corax White if you want as well. To highlight all of the white, I use some AK white. You don't have to use this if you've got white scar or bold titanium white from Pro Acryl. That's absolutely fine as well. What I'm looking to do is make sure I haven't got a huge amount on my brush. I'm looking to drag it across all the sharp edges on the armor. That should give you a nice crisp finish. Now, if you do happen to spill this or put it on too thickly, you can of course correct it using some of that Corax white. Next up, I'm going to take some Nagaroth Night and I'm going to thin this right down into a little bit of a glaze consistency. It's probably a little bit thicker than a glaze consistency, but what I'm looking to do is paint this over all of the feathers. And what you'll start to see as it starts to dry is those feathers will take on a slightly purple hue. It's not going to be hugely powerful. It's just going to be enough that it'll read as slightly purple. Next up, we're going to take some Dark Reaper and we're going to start to build up the texture on all of these feathers. So make sure you haven't got too much on your brush. Make sure you've got a really good tip as well. What I'm looking to do is drag this along some of the edges. Where I can't drag it across the edges, I'm looking to very carefully just plot in lots of thin lines. And that's really going to help build the texture up. To finish off the feathers, I'm going to take some Thunderhawk Blue and I'm going to paint this inside the Dark Reaper from the previous stage. So again, make sure you've got a huge amount on your brush, make sure you've got a really good tip, and where you can, drag it across the model to get those nice crisp highlights. Where you need to put those short dashing lines, make sure they're inside the Dark Reaper from the previous stage. And that's going to really help you get some nice readability on these feathers. And it's going to give them a slightly different black colour to how we're going to do the black armour. We'll do the metallics next, and I'm going to wash them all with the same colour. So first off, we'll do the Raven Guard symbol on the right greave. I'm going to base this using Balthazar Gold. For all of the silver, I'm going to take some dark aluminium from Vallejo Model Colour. If you haven't got this, you can use something like lead belcher. It's absolutely fine. Just take your time around those areas you've already finished. I'm then going to wash that gold icon and all the silver using Nuln Oil. So be careful around parts of the model you've already finished, particularly those white lightning claws, and just work the Nuln Oil into all of the recesses. You don't need to put it on too heavily at all. For all of the metallic structure, again, I based that with dark aluminium, but I don't want it to be a clean metal. I want it to be dirty and I want it to be rusty. So I'm going to paint this with Agrax Earthshade. So make sure this goes all over the silver metal elements that we've got supporting that column, being careful not to spill it on the stonework. When the Nuln Oil is dry, I'm going to go in and highlight that Raven Guard icon first. And the colour I'm using for this is Sycorax Bronze. Now, you don't need a huge amount of this. Just try and drag the brush to catch the edges. It's facing downwards, so there's not going to be a huge amount of light on it. Just take your time and get a nice crisp highlight. To highlight all of the silver, I'm going to use Chrome from Vallejo Model Air. If you haven't got this, something like Runefang Steel is absolutely fine. What I'm looking to do is drag my brush across the sharp edges to get nice, crisp silver highlights. Take your time with this. It's very easy to go a little bit too far. It's also very easy to get a little bit messy, particularly on those lightning claws. But what you're looking to do is drag the brush and get really nice crisp highlights. For the leather, we're going to do a nice rich brown colour. So we're going to base it all using Rhinox hide. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a little bit messy around some of the black armour, but do take your time near all of the silver elements you've already finished. As a first highlight, we'll take some Doom Bull Brown, and what I'm looking to do is drag my brush across the sharp edges to get really nice crisp highlights. Now, I'm going to paint the majority of the holster with this as well, because we're going to use the Rhinox hide more as kind of like the darkest recessed colour, whereas the Doom Bull is really the mid-tone. To finish the leather, I'm going to take a small amount of Scrag Brown and drag my brush across all those sharp edges to give me a really nice crisp highlight. Now, luckily when it comes to the holster, there's some nicks and scratches already moulded on, so I can just follow those with the Scrag Brown, and that's going to give me a really nice worn leather look on the holster. And for the belt, it's a real easy highlight. Once I've got those colours out, I am going to use them to do some rust. So taking that Doom Bull Brown, I'm going to thin it down with a little bit of water so it starts to be more of a wash consistency. And then I'm going to paint it over all the silver elements that I've got on that rect column, particularly focusing it on the recesses. Now this is going to look a little bit bright to start with, but because it's really thin, as it dries and that water evaporates, it's going to leave a really nice dark rust colour. To finish off the rust, I'm going to take some of that Scrag Brown. Again, I'm going to thin it down to a wash consistency. And I'm going to work it into the recesses on top of the Doom Bull Brown from the previous stage. So make sure that's dry. I'm going to use this fairly sparingly, but again, as it starts to dry, it's going to give you a lighter rust deposit, which is going to add a really nice bit of variation to this element. Once that's dry, I'm going to paint the red elements coming down from the arms. Now, I'm not entirely sure what I'd call this, but I guess it looks a little bit like red parchment. Looks a little bit like a scarf. I know it's not a scarf, but anyway, I'm using corn red to base this. Be very careful around the white elements and the feathers that you've already finished. When that's completely dry, take some Nuln Oil and shade it. Now, I am brushing in a downward motion with this because I want most of the Nuln Oil to be towards the bottom. That being said, I don't want it to pool heavy and look really ugly. So what I'm looking to do is just soak some of it up with my brush as it starts to dry, because I just really want to shade it into a darker red. When that's completely dry, I'm going to take a 50-50 highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet and Corn Red. And what I'm looking to do here is start highlighting all of these red elements. Work this towards the bottom where they're going to be brightest, but also use it to edge highlight. So where you've got those folds, make sure you paint across the top of that, leaving the darker red in the recesses. Next up, we'll do an edge highlight of pure Evil Sun Scarlet, and I'm just looking to drag my brush across the sharp edges here to get a nice bright element of red. So Take your time, make sure you haven't got too much on your brush, but you can't really go very far wrong with this. Lastly, I'm going to use a little bit of Wild Rider Red on my brush, and I'm just going to, again, drag this down the edges, making sure it's a nice thin highlight inside the Evil Sun Scarlet from the previous stage. This is just really going to help that red stand out. Next up, we're going to paint all of the bone elements. So there's lots and lots of bird skulls on this model. If you're not sure, check the box art just in case you miss any. So I'm using Morghast bone for this. I'm applying it very carefully across those lightning claws where I've painted the skulls white. It's going to cover in one coat, but across the skulls on the rest of the armor, I did need 3 coats with it. I also started to paint in some of the text going down the red elements. And what I found was my paint was a little bit thin, so I went back in with non-thin paint, make sure I had a really good point on my brush, and basically just started copying the shapes that are on the box art. Before I shaded all the skulls, I based all of the trailing paper from those drones with some Rakarth flesh, again because I'm going to base them with the same colour. So just take your time here. You will need 2 or 3 thin coats of Rakarth flesh. Be careful not to spill this onto things like the wings and also the rocks that you've already finished. I then washed all of the skulls and that paper with some Agrax Earthshade. Now it's really easy to put too much of this on, so just make sure you let it flow into the recesses and wick away any bits where it's starting to pull really heavily. When it comes to that paperwork, I'm just focusing it into the deepest recesses and towards the bottom. Once the Agrax Earthshade was completely dry, I went back in with some Rakarth flesh and started to highlight up all of that parchment paper. What I was looking to do here is drag my brush across the sharp edges, but also where I've got nice big flat areas, I just covered all of this with Rakarth flesh because it just gives a nice little bit of readability to that part of the model. I finished up by dragging some pallid witch flesh across the sharpest edges and also stippling it towards the ends where you've got lots of that parchment visible. I then went in with some Screaming Skull and used this to highlight all of the skulls on the model. So what I was looking to do here is just leave that darker colour in the recesses, and once you've kind of got the idea of how these skulls look, it's fairly easy to see what bits you're aiming for. Just take your time, make sure you haven't got too much paint on your brush, as that's going to make it difficult. To add the cracking lightning on the lightning claws, the first thing I did was take some Stegadon Scale Green and really thin it down, probably into a little bit of a glaze consistency, probably a little thicker. And what I look to do here is paint it back towards where the claws are coming out of the wrist mount. Now, it's important you haven't got too much on your brush for this, and also that you tap it on a paper towel before you go towards the model, as that's going to take all the moisture out and make it a lot easier to do with this stage. Once the first layer was done, I did another one just to start to really build in that colour. Next, I took some Sotek Green and did exactly the same thing, thinned it down to a glaze consistency and then painted it back towards where the claws are coming out of the hand, focusing this more towards the white area of the hand, so that it looks like the claws are getting brighter the closer to the power source. When that was dry, I then took some Temple Guard blue and started to paint in some really rough electrical sparks. Again, you don't have to be immensely tidy with this, but it's just some jagged lines coming out of the hand down the claw, probably to about halfway. I finished the claws by taking a little bit of Baharoth blue and painting this inside the lightning crackles I painted from the previous stage, making sure that I'm not going to be putting it on too thickly, and probably at this point less is very much more. If you want to paint some lettering and text on the scrolls coming off those drones, I took a little bit of AK black, thinned it right down, and then started to paint some lines across it. Now, when I first put these on, I found they were a little bit thick because I had a little bit too much paint on my brush. So rather than repaint the whole thing, what I did was I carried on, finished all the text. I then took some pallid witch flesh and just stippled this over the areas that were too thick. And what that did was it made it look a little bit more like text. Moving on to that iconic black armour. If you haven't already, take some AK black and tidy all of the armour up. I then took some Corvus black and started to paint this in areas that are going to catch the most light. So this isn't an edge highlight, this is very much more of a volumetric highlight. So I'm painting huge swathes of the model with this because I'm not too concerned about it being too thick. I just wanted to help offset the greys I'm going to use later on. The next highlight we'll do is with Ash and Grey. And what I'm looking to do here is a nice crisp edge highlight. So I haven't got too much paint on my brush and I'm making sure I've got a really good tip on there. What I'm doing is dragging the brush across the sharp edges of the model. So this should give me a nice crisp highlight. If you need to go in and just very carefully paint some of these highlights, then do that as well. The really benefit of this is that if you do make any mistakes or you do put it on a little bit thick, you can always go back in with that Corvus black to correct it. So this highlight is a little bit of a chunky highlight, but that said, try and keep it as crisp and neat as possible. The final highlight on all the armour is with Dawnstone. Now this really is a fine highlight. So as you can see, I've got a very good tip and barely any paint on my brush. I'm doing exactly the same thing I did in the last step. I'm dragging my brush across the model. What I'm trying to do is keep this inside the Ash and Grey. And that's what's visually going to give us a little bit of a progression through the highlights. So that whilst it comes across as sharp on the tabletop, there is a little bit of transition there. So again, take your time with this and you can always fix any mistakes that you make. For the thruster on the jump pack, just take some frost hard contrast paint and paint this over the white that you've already put in there. Now this is a nice and easy, straightforward step. Just don't flood the area and you should get a fairly nice blue glow. Now I already based the face using Rakarth Flesh just to make this step easier. If you haven't done that, then you can just put a couple of coats of Kislev Flesh down. Just make sure you keep it thin and be very careful around the face mask. If you spill it on the hair, that's okay because that's easy to fix. It's just a little more difficult on the face mask. Next up, I'm going to take some Reikland Flesh Shade and put this in all the deepest recesses. I'm not going to cover the whole of the head with this. I just want to focus it around the eye, the brow and the face mask. When that's completely dry, go back to Kislev Flesh and just layer up over the face, leaving that darker colour in all of the recesses. This is just going to start to build up some of the complexion on the face, but we are going to make it a lot brighter. I'm then going to take some Flayed One Flesh and I'm going to paint this again over the majority of the face. Now the reason we've put Kislev Flesh down first is it gives us a little bit of a darker colour where we want it around the back of the head that's going to be in shadow, but also it's a lot easier to then put the Flayed One Flesh down on it. So again, we're highlighting the same areas that we did with the Kislev Flesh, we're just brightening them right up. The final highlight is a 50-50 mix of Pallid Witch Flesh and Flayed One Flesh. Now this is a lot lighter, and what I'm looking to do here is obviously highlight the brow, but I'm also looking to paint some thin lines across the forehead just to give the impression of some frown lines. Lastly, we've got a couple of lenses to do. So we've got the eye lens on the face and we also have the lenses on the drone. So I'm going to dot them with some white scar and then going to very carefully pop some bar red contrast paint over them so we have a really nice bright lens. And there we have it. Aethon Shaan is done and ready for the tabletop. This is an absolutely fantastic Space Marine model. I'm really happy with how it's come out. Almost inspiring me to paint some more Raven Guard. Got to stop myself doing that because I have so many Phobos Marines. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and a comment down below. Share it with your friends. It really does help the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.